I'm so privileged to be here today. I was here in the end of March, and I was here to present to a group of pre-service teachers. And what typically happens whenever I attend any kind of workshop, I'm always the one that walks away with something. And being here in March was no different, because I had an opportunity to meet some amazing pre-service teachers, and it just made me feel good because we're in a really demanding time in education right now, aren't we? Very demanding. And I felt so good about the teachers that I met. I was like, boy, we're passing the baton to some really awesome teachers. And I also walked away here with, I increased my Amazon bill because I learned about some awesome books that Dr. Fain, if you did not have an opportunity or to be here in March, if you're going to be here this afternoon, definitely go to her session about books, because that was a wonderful treat for me. Went back, my books came in, of course, in 2 days, and I started reading one of the chapter books to my students, and they absolutely loved it. So I was asked today to speak about teacher leadership. That's a huge topic, a very huge topic. And what is teacher leadership, and how many of you would consider yourself a teacher leader? So to get started on the presentation, I thought, well, let me go ahead and ask some of my colleagues. If I tell them the phrase teacher leadership, what do they think of? And I asked them to give me some words. So I was talking to principals, I was talking to teachers, and I got a whole bunch of words from them. And I had this word cloud that I created. And if you're familiar with word clouds, what happens is it takes the frequency of the words that are occurring, and it puts the biggest word that occurs the most frequently, it makes the biggest word. Well, the word that came up was model. And there were probably 125 other words. And what that told me was, even as a group of educated professionals, we're not even sure what teacher leadership is. So then I thought, okay, well, let me look at something else. Let me look at a definition. Remove this. And I found this definition. Can you still hear me okay? I've got a teacher voice. It said, a set of skills demonstrated by teachers who continue to teach students, but also have an influence that extends beyond their own classroom to others within their school, their district, or elsewhere. Well, I thought that sounds pretty good, but if I stood here today and talked to you about a definition, are you going to feel very motivated or inspired? Well, if I was sitting in the audience, I wouldn't feel motivated or inspired by a definition. So that brought me back to square zero. So I thought, okay, let me start looking at websites. I found a whole bunch of websites on teacher leadership. And I found this one called the Teacher Leadership Initiative. And it chronicles all the competencies in leadership. The interesting thing was, at the very top of that website, there was a sentence that said, there is no one widely accepted definition of teacher leadership. I was like, oh, great. Now I'm back at square one again. So if we don't know what teacher leadership is, how are we supposed to know if we're teacher leaders? And if you're sitting in the audience today as an administrator, how do you know what you're supposed to do to support teacher leadership? So then it finally dawned on me. I went back to my training. I've been on about 3 different trips as Teacher of the Year, and a lot of learning. And one of the things that they always suggested is stories. I was like, oh, I can do stories. I got lots of stories. Stories are universal. They fuel us, they motivate us, they engage us, and it doesn't matter how old we are. We love stories. So that's how I decided to talk about teacher leadership today. And my first story starts with a little girl named Kathy. And she's 9 years old. And she has missed part of her lesson, her science lesson at school that day, because she had to go for an appointment outside of school. When she gets back into her classroom, her science teacher quickly gets her focus back on her lesson. And the teacher tells her to look at a picture of the squid in her science book. Well, Kathy's looking at this squid, and she's like, this thing is grotesque. It's got this big, ugly, see-through head. Ugh. But her teacher keeps her focused on the lesson that day. Her teacher kept her focused because Kathy had learned that day that she had a rare retinal disease that was going to eventually take her vision. So her teacher was using learning to help heal Kathy's sorrow. So we fast forward to 2 years later, and now Kathy's in the 5th grade. Can I move this down? I feel like it's sticking me in my mouth. And she's in the 5th grade, and she still has some of her vision. She's the fastest runner in the class, but she's scared. She's scared that her lack of vision is going to take her out of the race. So her teacher in 5th grade that year says to the second fastest runner, As you're coming around the track, I want you to yell to Kathy that you're coming. So the second fastest runner gets started. She's coming around the track, and as she gets close to Kathy, she's like, Kathy, I'm coming. Kathy, I'm almost there. Kathy, hold out the baton. Hold out your hand. I'm getting ready to hand you the baton. So Kathy holds out her hand. She grabs the baton, and she starts running. And she can still see those white lines on the track. Kathy will tell you that that teacher gave her hope. By the time Kathy is 11 years old, she's in the school for the blind, and another teacher steps into her life. This teacher's name is Mrs. Francisco, and Mrs. Francisco was her piano teacher. Well, Mrs. Francisco had great content knowledge because Kathy said that when she heard her play, she could imagine herself playing with that level of proficiency. She also had great toolbox of instructional strategies. Kathy was learning to play the song Juanita, and she said her hands betrayed her over and over again. So Mrs. Francisco assigned finger numbers to each note and told Kathy to play with her left hand for a while, then her right hand for a while, until she got so proficient that she could put both hands together. And she said when she did that for the first time, she could actually imagine herself sitting in a concert hall as a concert pianist with her wrists lifted and her fingers curled just the way they were supposed to be. Well, Mrs. Francisco gave her students what they needed. She searched deep inside of her heart and gave her students what they needed. And Kathy would describe Mrs. Francisco as a teacher that turned her students into warriors. All of Kathy's teachers are examples of teacher leaders. They're teacher leaders right inside their own classroom. Nobody walked in the door and said, "Congratulations, you're a teacher leader." Nobody gave them a fancy title. They were reaching deep in their heart, and they were finding what their students needed, and they were giving them what they needed. So teacher leaders make a difference in the lives of their students. So how many of you have ever been told you're a leader? Anybody ever have anybody walk up to them and say, "I see you as a leader"? Or how many of you have ever told somebody that you see them as a leader? Well, that happened to me my second year of teaching. We were under the old evaluation system. This would be about 11 years ago now. And it was a second observation. And we had a new assistant principal at my school that year. And we were sitting down for our post-observation conference. And during the conference, she said to me, "I see you as a leader of your team." It's my second year teaching. And I'm thinking to myself, this lady has lost her marbles. She's lost her mind. I'm a second year teacher. I'm teaching with 8 other first grade teachers down that hallway that have anywhere from 11 to 27 years of experience on me. There's no way that they're going to accept me as a teacher leader of the team. It didn't matter. What she did that day was she planted a seed. She planted a voice that said, "I see you as a leader." Now, I had no idea what I was going to be leading, when or where I was going to be leading. It didn't matter because she had planted that seed. I didn't even really know if there would ever come an opportunity for me to be a teacher leader and become that teacher that she envisioned. So she saw something in me that I didn't know I had. Now, it's going to show you how many of you, I know some of you were here in March. Okay, so I had this really funny video. And the really funny video is, you can look it up. It's a TED Talk by Derek Sievers.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and the crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out. They won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So over the next minute, you'll see all of those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that, TED. Thanks.
And they talk about the fact that leadership is when you're willing to put your neck out there and go after something that you believe in. And then hopefully you have some followers that join you. And then it doesn't become about the leader anymore. It becomes about the followers. It becomes about the team. So my assistant principal that year planted this seed for me about becoming a teacher leader. And if you're an administrator today, look for the leadership qualities in everyone and don't miss anyone. We're in such a precarious state in education right now. We are expected to do more with less than ever before. And my mother always used to say, many hands make light work. And we still have a lot of work to do. Even though we've had some wonderful news yesterday, we still have a lot of work to do. So we've got to find those strengths that all of our teachers have and build from those strengths. But then we've also got to look at where are the areas where they need to grow and take those areas and build from there. We need to support them. We need to encourage them. We need to recognize the hard work. We need to keep building them up in order to achieve those opportunities to be great leaders, whether it's in our school or elsewhere. So leaders have the courage to develop and support the people that are in their building. So fast forward a couple years later, and my wonderful assistant principal is now going to become the principal at another school, an inner city Memphis school. So another teacher and I had been teaching at this point for years, and we decided that we would go ahead and transfer to this new school with her. Well, our first year there was nothing short of a nightmare. I had gone from my nice, comfy little suburban school, and now all of a sudden I was at a school with a student body that had significant academic and behavioral challenges. I was way in over my head. I thought I knew what I was going into. I didn't have a clue. So I can assure you, leadership opportunities were the last thing on my mind. I was strictly in survival mode. But every day during those first couple of years, I would march my little first graders past these doors that went to this enclosed outdoor courtyard. And I kept looking at that courtyard, and I could see the potential past all the weeds, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. So close to the end of my second year there, I finally got the courage to go to my principal and say, hey, can I turn that space into some sort of outdoor learning area? She said, sure. So I've got the support. She said, I just want you to do one thing. I said, okay, what's the one thing you want me to do? She said, I want you to survey the other teachers, I want you to survey the students, and I want you to find out if there's buy-in. I said, okay. So I put a survey together, and it took me a while to figure out how to put a survey together, but I finally put the survey together. I gave it to the teachers, and I actually created one to send home with the students so that we could hopefully get some parent feedback as well. So when all the results came back in, there was enough buy-in to justify getting the project off the ground. There was just one problem. Knucklehead here waited until the end of the school year, so it was summertime. And you know as well as I do that summers are a pretty sacred time for teachers, right? You're here. So I was like, uh-oh, now what am I going to do? The list of the buy-in was great, but the list of teachers to help get things kicked off was pretty short. In fact, it was just one person. And it was the other teacher that left the school with me with our assistant principal, who's now the principal. So I was like, well, that's okay. So I'm the lone nut. I've got a follower now, Emily. And Emily and I and our two husbands pretty much worked that entire summer. We were digging, we were tilling, we were building, we were planting, we were cleaning, and we were sweating a lot. But by the time the summer was over, we had this beautiful outdoor classroom that we lovingly refer to as the OC. And what we had done was we had created learning spaces that were tied to content. So we had a fraction garden that had raised beds in the shape of fractions. We also had a butterfly garden that was this beautiful space where we planted native plants, and we had some chairs out there. So when we had some of those children that were having a really rough day, our counselor could take them outside, and it would really serve like a meditation garden. We also had a color garden. The color garden had the primary colors, and it had these fairly decent sized panels with the different colors that represented also different fairy tale characters. And we had the stories tied with the fairy tales, and we had created these stones, and we had imprinted color words in there so kids could go out and look at the color words and match them if they were in the early grades and things like that. We also had a measurement garden. The measurement garden had all these measurement tools, and we had created this huge mural of Jack and the Beanstalk. And so Jack was kind of up there through the whole garden overseeing all of the outdoor classroom activities. So we also had a pond. And when I cleaned the pond out, because Emily didn't really like getting muddy and dirty like that, she was the builder, I found 2 fish. Well, those 2 fish have now created 50, 60 other fish, and we have about 3 turtles living in there. So it may not seem like a big deal. Okay, so you created an outdoor classroom. Yay! But what happened was, remember a few years earlier, my assistant principal had said, oh, I see you as a leader. I had an idea for an outdoor classroom. I get a follower, get some helpers. We build the outdoor classroom. And what happened was, the next year, Emily and I both found ourselves in leadership positions. Now, all of a sudden, we were leading our faculty on how to use this outdoor classroom with our students. The next thing I know is we're going to the Tennessee Environmental Education Association, and we're going to meetings, and I find myself getting elected to the board. I love these things because I always learn. It's always a selfish motivation. And then in Memphis, we have optional and traditional schools. And the optional schools have to have some sort of academic focus. And our academic focus had been enriched academics, whatever that really meant. And so as a faculty, we decided that we were going to have this theme of our school, and it was going to be environmental education. So we decided to make our academic focus ECO, educating children through the outdoors. Emily and I also found ourselves working with another team of teachers writing curriculum that would integrate activities in the outdoor classroom so that teachers had an idea as to what they could do when they got out there. So this little tiny idea, the lone nut idea, and the followers created this incredible opportunity. And what happened was, the best part was that our students got to go outside and play in this area and learn in this area. Because too many of our students at Keystone were not able to go outside and play after school because the neighborhood wasn't safe. So they were going out there and they were developing a work ethic, because I'd take my crew out there and we'd go out there and dig up the Tennessee garden and we'd get it ready for planting. And we would put all the seeds in there, and then they would have to follow through from planting to harvest and do the work that was needed to make that happen. They were also developing problem solving and critical thinking skills, because when they went out there, they were asking questions. Emily's national board portfolio was built on that outdoor classroom because her kids kept going out there saying, "Miss Underwood, why is that cucumber yellow? And why are these leaves yellow? And why is this cucumber green?" And she came back to me because I was mentoring her at that point through national board, and I said, "Emily, there's your science project right there." They're asking those questions. So it was building these critical thinking and problem solving skills for our kids. So teacher leaders, they also have the courage to dream. They have the courage to be the lone nut. But the development of our leadership didn't stop there. It didn't stop with just environmental education. Our principal continued to develop our strengths. I loved teaching math, and Emily was a reading rock star. So she continued to develop us and pursue opportunities that were related to our strengths. But she also encouraged us to grow. I loved technology, but I didn't really think I was so great at integrating technology in my classroom. So my principal encouraged me to present at a conference, a technology conference that our district held every year. So I did. I can assure you I learned a lot about technology before I presented at that conference. Emily was comfortable presenting within the four walls of our school to our faculty. She wasn't so comfortable presenting outside of that. It was really nerve-wracking for her to think about that. But she was such an expert in reading that she ended up becoming a curriculum writer for our district in reading and social studies. And she had an opportunity to present to our district, and now she's one of the most sought-after trainers for our district during summer learning times. So we not only had the opportunity to develop and grow our strengths, but she also encouraged us to develop and grow the areas where we were challenged. And it also ended up creating an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of our students. So you got teacher leaders in your classroom, you got teacher leaders in your school, but you've also got teacher leaders in your district. And not necessarily because they're asked to be teacher leaders. They may see a problem or a challenge, and they may decide to go after it. So several years ago in Shelby County Schools, it was back when we were still Memphis City Schools, if you know the history of Memphis City and Shelby County Schools, they decided to create a different component in our evaluation system. And it was going to be based on stakeholder perceptions. It was going to count for 5% of our overall evaluations. And when it first was introduced, it was a nightmare. It started with students in the second grade, and they were supposed to read it on their own, but it wasn't written in developmentally friendly language. Our students couldn't even read it, let alone being told what sort of accommodations we could do for students that had individual education plans, IEPs. So we weren't allowed to read it to them. We weren't allowed to give extra time to students that had IEPs. And the worst part of all was that 5% of this information that was coming back was going to count on teachers' evaluation. So a lot of teachers were not too happy when the results came back because clearly they knew that there were some students that didn't understand this information. That's okay, because in stepped Casey Jones. Casey is a teacher at an alternative school in Memphis with Shelby County now, and she works with students that are transitioning from juvenile detention, juvenile court type situations, and she's helping them transition back into the regular classroom. And she saw that this was a huge problem. So she pulled together a small group of teachers, and she and the small group of teachers and her students came up with a survey. And they sent the survey out to more teachers across the district to get some feedback. So when all the data came back in, she put the data in front of her students and the small group of teachers, and from that information they drafted a letter to the district. And the following year we had a new survey. We had a survey that was written in developmentally appropriate language for our younger students. We had a clear guidelines about the accommodations that we needed to provide our students. And we had more teacher buy-in, which was really the whole point in the first place, because if the teachers don't buy into it, then there's not really going to be an impact like we want to see, like we need to see. So the next year, that made such a huge difference for teachers, because that 5%, could keep you from 4 to 5, 3 to a 4, that sort of thing. There's an author by the name of Rick Hess. He wrote the book, The Cage-Busting Teacher. And earlier this year, I got to sit in on a webinar with Rick Hess. And I'm listening to Rick, and he actually mentions Casey. And he describes Casey as a cage-busting teacher because she took a problem, she took a challenge that we were experiencing in our district, and then she just ran with it. She didn't go and ask anybody if she could do it. She just started running with it. So I call her courageous. I call her courageous because she was a teacher leader who was willing to share her voice. So our voices matter. So we've got some different stories, hopefully some useful lessons. And Casey teaches us about the power of sharing our voices. Our voices do have power, but more often than not, we don't share them because we're scared. I was even talking to some folks at Chalkbeat in Memphis a few weeks ago, and they were so appreciative of me interviewing with them, and I was like, why are you so appreciative? I mean, talking about education, I love talking about education. She said, we can't get teachers to talk to us. They're too scared. So we know what's going on in our classrooms on a day in, day out basis, and we do need to share our voices. Shortly after being honored as Tennessee's Teacher of the Year in October, my husband and I were driving back the next day, and I was reading the Tennessean, and I was looking at a survey that they had in there about opinions towards our Common Core state standards that we called them back in October. And there were a lot of misinformation. And I was really scared that the standards were going to be repealed. I was teaching first grade when the standards were first introduced, so I felt like I had all this lead time on getting my head wrapped around the instructional shifts and what these standards were supposed to help accomplish. And once I got my head wrapped around it, those standards were my roadmap for teaching my students, teaching them to become critical thinkers, teaching them to become problem solvers. And I actually had the opportunity when the standards were introduced to go from first grade and loop to second grade with my students. And with the ones that were still there the following year, I was starting to see them rise to the challenge. So I was really scared that the standards could be repealed. In fact, when I had the opportunity to meet Governor Haslam in October, that was my question to him. If it went to a vote right now in front of the General Assembly, what would happen? He said, Ms. Vogelsang, they would probably be repealed. And my eyes popped out of my head. So when I got back home, I decided I'm going to draft a letter, and I'm going to send it to all of the members of the House and the Senate Education Committees. Was I scared? You better believe it, because now all of a sudden I got this title that's, now I'm not just Karen Vogelsang, the teacher from Keystone Elementary, now I'm Karen Vogelsang, the Tennessee Teacher of the Year. So I was a little worried how that would go over. But I put the letter together and I sent it. I started to get replies. That I was really shocked about. Now, I knew where the position was on a lot of these different members, and I knew that they all didn't necessarily agree with me. But when I wrote them the letter, I told them what I thought could happen for teachers and, more importantly, for students if the standards were repealed. So many of them told me that what they most often get is just a long tirade of everything that's wrong in education with no solutions in there whatsoever. Or they told me they get hate mail. So the naysayers had their attention, and you know that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So several of them said, oh, I didn't know that there were any teachers out there that had positive experiences with our standards. Because the people that were having great news, people that were having good experiences, weren't sharing their voices. It's not just sharing the negative, it's also sharing the positive. A lot of them encouraged me to send the letter to the rest of the General Assembly. So I did. And I also learned if you're sending a letter, you don't ever send a letter to all of them at one time. You send one individually if you're ever going to do this, okay? So did the letter with the title, sent it out. And I did that for all the members. Now, you know as well as I do that our standards were not repealed. Was that because I sent a letter? No. But I did share my voice, just like Casey shared her voice, and we enlisted the help of other teachers to share their voices. So that's what teacher leaders do. They share their voices. Our voices do matter. So the next lesson, hopefully, is that our words have power. And my assistant principal planted those 6 little words in my head. I see you as a leader. Our words do have power, but too often in this fast-paced world, we don't slow down long enough to think about the words that we're saying or the words that we're hearing. We get information in seconds, but then what do we do with it? Words have power. They have the power to hurt, they have the power to lead, they have the power to inspire, They have the power to motivate and challenge. I tell my students all the time, there is enough bad in the world that we have got to do things that lift each other up and not tear each other down, regardless of whether we agree with each other or not. So the words you speak with each other, the words that you speak with your colleagues, your students, the parents, they matter. Our voices do have power. So back to Kathy. Kathy's teachers demonstrated the power of teaching from the heart. If there is no other takeaway from this keynote that I'm giving you today, I hope you'll remember this one. We need to teach and lead from the heart. Even with this world that seems to be more connected than ever before, we seem to be serving a generation of students that are more disconnected than ever and in desperate need of relationships that matter. Yeah, we need to have content knowledge. We need to know what it is that we're teaching so that we can reach our students. Yes, we absolutely need to have effective instructional strategies. We need to have a toolbox so that we can motivate and engage our students and get them to where they need to be. But what would the impact on our profession be if we were really teaching and leading from the heart? Because if we just see our students as a name on a class roster, then no amount of content knowledge or instructional strategies is going to make a difference. It would be so easy at this point in time in education with all the pressures that are out there to just fold in, cave in, and give up and go get a job at Walmart. But if we did that, we're going to miss opportunities to make a difference in the lives of our students and make a difference in the lives of our colleagues. Kathy's teachers led from the heart. They made a difference in her life. And those teachers' roots run deep. They run deep because Kathy became a teacher. And she's not just any teacher, she's the Indiana Teacher of the Year. She can't see her students, but I promise you she knows them. The roots of Mrs. Francisco and Kathy's other teachers not only impacted Kathy, they now impact me. When I think about if I'm having a hard day, I think about Kathy. I think about Kathy not being able to see her students. And she's a writing teacher. She teaches her students how to write. And she's a beautiful writer and a beautiful person inside and out. And she'll share the story that when she first started teaching high school, she teaches high school if I didn't mention that, her kids used to sneak out of the class. Now there isn't a child in her class that ever wants to leave the room because she's such a dynamic teacher. Kathy was one of the finalists this year, one of the 4 finalists for National Teacher of the Year. And one of her students wrote this letter of recommendation. It's from Anthony Collins. And he says, Miss Nimmer was my English teacher 7 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. Miss Nimmer was the most caring and memorable teacher I had ever met. I went through some pretty tough times with school and with my parents. And Miss Nimmer talked to me one day and helped me and inspired me to turn my life completely around. Every war has a turning point, and my talk with Miss Nimmer was a turning point in a war within myself. Ever since then, our bond has been tighter than ever. Miss Nimmer wasn't just my teacher, she became my friend and mentor, and I trusted her and I knew she believed in me. Her methods of teaching worked best for me, and she was an encouragement. I struggled in school too, and with her help, I improved immensely. Incredibly, she sees things in her students that are far beyond what the human eye can see. I can't thank Miss Nimmer enough. She has accomplished so much and has overcome devastating adversity. Can you imagine teaching and being blind? How many people would dare to try? Not only is she courageous, she's successful and effective as well. One would think that losing their eyesight at an early age would be the end of life, but not Miss Nimmer. She's strong, she never stopped dreaming, and she didn't let anything get in her way. I graduated from college in May, and I'm an active duty lieutenant in the United States Army. I've come a long way, and I owe my success to her. Without her, I'm not too sure I would have gone on to college. My grades were not very good before I met her. Miss Nimmer means so much to me that if anything happened to me while in combat or anywhere else, I would want to donate my eyes to her. She deserves the best that life has to offer, and I would want her to know how thankful I am. Clearly, Kathy teaches from the heart, and the tremendous impact of her teachers caused her to become a teacher, And now those roots continue to run deep in me, in Tony, and so many others. So what we do matters. You saw that word cloud with all those words on there, and you can pick any of those words to use to define teacher leadership. You can find so many websites out there on the internet that talk about teacher leadership. But what I really believe is that ultimately we grow and lead when we are teaching from the heart, when we're leading from the heart, when we're daring to dream, when we are using our words wisely, when we're sharing our solutions-oriented voices, and most importantly, we're getting up every day and going to a job that we love where we can make a difference for students and for our colleagues. If you click one more time, you will see a picture of this, who I now can call my dear friend, Kathy Nimmer, and her dog, Elias. And again, there's power in sharing your voices, there's power in our words, there's power in dreaming. And I just can't thank you enough for allowing me to be here today. Lipscomb University is always going to be a special place in my heart, so thank you all so much for letting me be here today.